Texas doesn't advertise its failures. The Lone Star State would rather you focus on oil booms, cattle ranches, and urban skylines than the hundreds of towns that went bust and vanished into the desert. But tucked into remote corners of the state are places where ambition died hard, where fortunes evaporated overnight, and where entire communities just packed up and left. Some were wiped out by nature, others collapsed when the money ran dry. A few literally sank beneath the water. These are 11 ghost towns in Texas you're not supposed to know. Number 11, Shafter. Out in Presidio County, 18 miles north of the Mexican border town of Presidio, sits Shafter in the Chinati Mountains along Cibolo Creek. This wasn't some dusty prospecting camp that petered out after a few months. Shafter was the real deal, Texas's only successful major silver mining town, and at its peak, housed 4,000 people chasing silver dreams in the Chihuahuan Desert. The story starts in September 1880 when John Spencer, a rancher and freighter hauling supplies to Fort Davis, noticed something glittering in a rock outcrop. He showed the sample to Colonel William R. Shafter, commander of the 1st Infantry Regiment at Fort Davis. The assay came back positive for silver, and Shafter immediately brought in 2 Army buddies, Lieutenant John L. Bullis and Lieutenant Louis Wilhelmi, to secure land around the strike. The 4 partners bought 2,560 acres, but lacked the capital and mining expertise to extract the ore themselves. In June 1882, they leased the land to a California mining group who formed the Presidio Mining Company in 1883. Each partner received 5,000 shares of stock and $1,600 cash. By 1883, the Presidio mine was producing ore valued at $45 per ton, and the town of Shafter sprouted around the operation. A post office opened in 1885. The Presidio Mining Company provided everything: company housing, a company store, a company doctor, and eventually a hospital and clubhouse. The Sacred Heart of Jesus Catholic Church opened in 1888 and became the social hub of town. The workforce was diverse. Mexican laborers from both sides of the border, Black Americans seeking better wages, and California miners all worked the shafts until many left for the Alaska Gold Rush in 1897. Mule-drawn wagons hauled ore 1 mile from the mines to the mill until 1913, when a tramway was installed. The mines dug deep, 400 to 700 feet into the earth, excavating nearly 100 miles of tunnels. Some ore pockets assayed at $500 per ton. Between 1883 and 1940, the Shafter mine produced over 30 million ounces of silver, which represents 90% of Texas's entire silver output. Small amounts of gold and large quantities of lead were also recovered. By 1940, Shafter's population peaked at 4,000, but the boom was ending. In 1942, faced with rising production costs, labor shortages, and unionization efforts, the American Metal Company shut down operations. The population crashed. By 1949, only about 20 people remained, and the cemetery population far exceeded the living. Today, Shafter has fluctuated between 11 and 30 residents. The Catholic Church still stands. Abandoned houses lean against the wind. The ruins of the Presidio Mining Company or reduction mill crumble in the desert sun. In 1976, the town was designated the Shafter Historic Mining District and added to the National Register of Historic Places. The 1971 film The Andromeda Strain was filmed in Shafter, and parts of There Will Be Blood were shot at the Presidio mine. But mostly, Shafter sits quiet. A ribbon of green cottonwood trees along Cibolo Creek, marking where silver once made men rich and then left them with nothing.
Number 10, Terlingua. Near Big Bend National Park, about 8 miles from the park's western entrance, Terlingua sprawls across the desert as one of Texas's most famous ghost towns. But unlike most ghost towns, Terlingua refuses to stay dead. It's inhabited by artists, loners, and outcasts who've built a weird, resilient community in the ruins of a mercury mining operation. The name Terlingua likely comes from tres lenguas, meaning 3 tongues in Spanish, referring either to the 3 languages spoken in the area, Native American, English, Spanish, or the 3 forks of Terlingua Creek.
Native Americans knew about the cinnabar in the area for centuries, prizing its brilliant red color for body paint and pictographs. But commercial mining didn't start until Jack Dawson reportedly produced the first mercury from Terlingua ore in 1888. The district was slow to develop until the mid-1890s, when newspapers and mining industry magazines began publicizing the finds. By 1900, 4 mining companies had extracted 1,000 flasks of quicksilver in the district. Lindheim and Dewey's, Marfa and Mariposa, California, and Excelsior. A post office opened in 1899 at the California mountain mining community. The game changer arrived in 1902 when Chicago industrialist Howard E. Perry discovered that land he'd received as payment for a debt sat atop rich cinnabar deposits. According to legend, a cowboy observed drops of quicksilver form on the ground from the heat of a branding fire. The ore was that prevalent. Perry incorporated the Chizos Mining Company in May 1903, and it became the largest mercury producer in the area, and for a time, the entire United States. The Chizos mine operated for 4 decades, with 3 shafts connecting 23 miles of workings over 17 levels. By 1905, Terlingua's population hit about 1,000. The Chizos Mining Company owned and ran the entire town. It operated the general store, provided a company doctor, ran the post office, the Chizos Hotel, a commissary, telephone service and water service hauled from the Rio Grande 12 miles away by Mexican freighters. Perry built a sprawling mansion on a hill overlooking the town, which still stands today. Miners lived in segregated camps divided between Mexican and white workers, housed in temporary shacks and sheds built from tin, lumber, adobe, and canvas. The commissary and smelter were the only permanent structures initially. In 1910, the company built a 6-mile tramway across the Rio Grande to what's now Big Bend National Park, where ore was unloaded and freighted by mule-drawn cart to the railroad in Marathon. The popular Old Ore Road through Big Bend backcountry follows part of this historic freight route. Mining was brutal work. Fatal accidents occurred regularly, given the primitive equipment and inadequate safety measures. Miners also suffered from mercury poisoning, a condition called salivation, where inhaled fumes from smelting stimulated saliva secretion, causing teeth to loosen and fall out. The influenza epidemic of 1918 to 1919 filled the cemetery as well. By 1934, it was estimated the Chizos Mining Company had sold over $12 million in mercury. One employee claimed the company averaged daily profits of $2,000 during the early war years of World War I. But like all boom towns, the end came. After 1936, production declined. On October 1st, 1942, the company filed for bankruptcy. It was sold to Texas Railway Equipment Company on March 15, 1943, for $81,000 and operated as the Esperado Mine through the end of World War II in 1945. The district produced about 150,000 flasks of quicksilver from 1903 through 1937, accounting for most U.S. quicksilver production during that period. When the mines closed, most people left. Terlingua supported a population of about 350 through the late 1940s, before declining to a true ghost town. Tourism brought new life in the late 1960s and early 1970s thanks to proximity to Big Bend National Park. Today, Terlingua has a small but vibrant population. The Starlight Theater operates as a restaurant. St. Agnes Catholic Church still stands. The Terlingua Cemetery, opened in 1902, is now on the National Register of Historic Places. The cemetery is famous for its haphazard layout and unique graves decorated with beer bottles, rosaries, and Grateful Dead CDs. Some graves have lawn chairs beside them for visitors to sit and talk to the dead. Every November 2nd, a Dia de los Muertos celebration transforms the cemetery into a colorful display of florals, candles, and paper streamers. Terlingua also hosts 2 annual chili cook-offs on the first Saturday of November, drawing over 10,000 chili heads. the Chile Appreciation Society International, and the Frank X. Tolbert/Wick Fowler World Championship, established in 1967. The 2020 census recorded a population of 78. Locals claim to see apparitions of miners walking down the streets as if heading to work. The cemetery is said to be haunted by the souls of miners who died in the dangerous conditions. Number 9. Indianola. Indianola isn't just a ghost town, it's a ghost town that's mostly underwater. What was once Texas's second busiest port, rivaling Galveston, now sits beneath the shallow waters of Matagorda Bay on the Gulf Coast. Only a cemetery, a statue of French explorer La Salle, and a few historical markers remain on land. The town's origins trace to 1844 when Prince Karl of Salms-Braunfels, Commissioner General of the Adelsverein, Society for the Protection of German Immigrants in Texas, selected a stretch of beach near Indian Point as the arrival spot for German immigrants. The area was briefly called Karlshafen after a town in Germany. In 1846, Sam Addison White and William M. Cook officially founded Indian Point. The first house was built by Johann Schwartz in 1845. The port served as an army depot during the Mexican War and became the chief port of debarkation for thousands of European immigrants settling western Texas. In February 1849, Indian Point merged with nearby Karlshafen and became Indianola. The post office opened in September 1847, and stagecoach service started in January 1848. Indianola became the county seat of Calhoun County from 1852 to 1886. The town grew rapidly. Charles Morgan's New York-based steamship line selected Indianola as the Matagorda Bay terminus, and the town expanded 3 miles down the beach to Powderhorn Bayou. Indianola became Texas's second-largest port. The town had a courthouse, jail, newspaper, drugstore, blacksmith shop, 2 hotels, and several saloons and general stores. During the Civil War, Indianola faced occupation. In October 1862, Union gunboats bombarded the town, leading to occupation and looting before withdrawal a month later. Union forces returned in November 1863 and remained until 1864. In July 1869, Indianola made history when the world's first shipment of mechanically refrigerated beef was transported from Indianola to New Orleans on a Morgan steamship. Railroad service from Indianola to the interior commenced in 1871. By 1875, Indianola's population exceeded 5,000, and the town was at its peak prosperity. Then, disaster struck. On September 16, 1875, a catastrophic hurricane with winds of 110 miles per hour literally blew the town away. One Kansas newspaper called it the most severe flood since the days of Noah. Initial reports estimated 100 to 150 deaths, though the exact toll is impossible to determine. The destruction was complete. Indianola rebuilt, but on a smaller scale. The population began declining, and by 1880, fewer than 2,000 people remained. On August 19th to 20th, 1886, a second hurricane struck, this one even more devastating than the first. It was a Category 4 storm with 150 miles per hour winds and a pressure at landfall of 925 millibars, making it the 6th strongest hurricane ever to hit the United States. A 15-foot storm surge from Matagorda Bay overwhelmed the town. Every building in Indianola was either destroyed or left uninhabitable. When the signal office was blown down, a fire started and destroyed several neighboring blocks. The fire consumed all but 2 of the town's buildings. At least 46 people died in Indianola, far fewer than the 400 killed in the 1875 storm, largely because this storm struck during the day and residents had time to seek shelter. Understandably, residents were demoralized. Some houses that survived were floated across the bay and converted into other uses. The town's ice warehouse floated across the bay and became a house. In late February 1887, the Southern Pacific Railroad removed its track from Indianola to Port Lavaca. signaling total abandonment. The county seat moved to Port Lavaca. On October 4th, 1887, the post office in Indianola was permanently closed and the town was declared dead. The destruction of Indianola served as a warning to Galveston, 100 miles up the coast, but calls for a seawall to protect that city went unheeded. Galveston nearly shared Indianola's fate when the Galveston hurricane of 1900 struck, killing an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people. Today, due to storm erosion, most of the site of Indianola is underwater. A granite marker was placed on the shore at the nearest point to where the courthouse once stood, now 300 feet away in Matagorda Bay. It reads, Calhoun County Courthouse, Edward Beaumont, architect 1859. During the storms of 1875 and 1886, precious lives were saved within its walls of shell, concrete, and lime. Abandoned, 1886. Indianola was designated a recorded Texas Historic Landmark in 1963. The site is also home to a statue of René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, who mistakenly landed his colonists at Matagorda Bay on February 20th, 1685, believing he was near the Mississippi River. Some historians believe Indianola could have grown as large as Houston, if not for the hurricanes. Instead, it's known as the Queen of Texas Ghost Towns, literally washed off the map by Mother Nature. Number 8. Helena. Helena in Karnes County, founded in 1852, was once the county seat and a stopping place between San Antonio and the Texas coast. In its heyday, it had a courthouse, jail, newspaper, drugstore, blacksmith shop, 2 hotels, and several saloons and general stores. According to local lore, when people in Helena fought, they called it the Helena Duel. Fighters would tie their right hands together and use a 4-inch knife to try to end their dispute. It was brutal, personal, and very Texas. But a different kind of feud led to Helena's decline. The story goes that after a sheriff's deputy shot and killed a local businessman's son, the angry, grieving father vowed to dry up Helena. Legend says he paid to have the railroad, originally planned to pass through Helena, rerouted through neighboring Karnes City. The decision created the Big Curve, a railroad bend that bypassed Helena, still traced today by Highway 181. Without the railroad, Helena's fate was sealed. Businesses moved to Karnes City. The county seat relocated. The population dwindled. About 200 people still call Helena home today, which puts it on the list of ghost towns that are still alive, though not in the way founders envisioned. They wear the ghost town label with pride, said Mallory Deason, who runs the Karnes County Historical Society Museum. We were considered the toughest little town in Texas. The 2-story courthouse still stands, along with the original post office, the county's first Masonic lodge, and an old farmhouse that belonged to the Sicanius family, where local quilters met for years. In 1962, residents formed a group to preserve the town's history and the abandoned courthouse. The museum oversees preservation of the courthouse and several historic buildings on the old square. In a town without a mayor, police department, or school district, both the cemetery and the museum have their own boards that help make decisions about building maintenance and renovation. Deason is pushing for air conditioning and heat in the courthouse, modern conveniences that will help bring history into the present. Ghost town museums like Helena don't get many visitors, but after a recent appearance on the Texas travel show, The Day Tripper, they've had more people dropping by. Deason hopes to bring school groups to the ghost town to teach students about how the area's history shaped today's community. They need to know their history of where they live, she said. Number 7. Glenrio. Straddling the Texas-New Mexico border on Old Route 66, Glenrio once welcomed weary travelers with neon signs, hot coffee, and the promise of rest after hundreds of miles of driving. The town lived by the highway and died by it when Interstate 40 diverted traffic elsewhere in the 1970s. Glenrio is split between Deaf Smith County, Texas, and Key County, New Mexico. The name allegedly comes from a combination of Glen and Rio, Spanish for river, though there's no significant river nearby. Some locals claim it was named by a railroad official who combined Scottish and Spanish words, which would be perfectly fitting for a border town that never quite belonged to either state. The town came to life in 1903 when the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad built through the area. It served as a shipping point for cattle and wheat from surrounding ranches and farms. When Route 66 was commissioned in 1926, running from Chicago to Los Angeles, Glenrio found itself positioned on one of America's most famous highways. The Mother Road brought prosperity. By the 1950s, Glenrio had become a bustling stop for cross-country travelers. The old Little Juarez Diner served hot meals around the clock. A Texaco station pumped gas into cars with fins and chrome. The State Line Motel offered clean beds and running water. The first motel/last motel, depending on which direction you were traveling, capitalized on its location with signs proclaiming it the first or last stop in Texas. Travelers could buy cigarettes, postcards, souvenirs, and cold drinks. Kids could stretch their legs while parents refueled. Route 66 was the main artery of American automobile culture, and Glenrio was one of thousands of towns that depended entirely on that traffic. Then came the interstate highway system. In 1973, Interstate 40 was completed, bypassing Glenrio by several miles. Almost overnight, the traffic disappeared. Cars that once stopped for gas and food now roared past at 75 miles per hour on a highway that had no exits for Glenrio. The businesses couldn't survive. The diner closed. The motel shut down. The gas station pumped its last gallon. People moved to towns along the new interstate where there was work. By 1975, Glenrio was effectively dead. An eerie row of abandoned buildings stands frozen in the 1950s. The old Little Juarez Diner sits empty, its counters collecting dust instead of tips. The Texaco station still has its pumps, though they haven't dispensed gas in decades. Motel rooms with sagging beds and peeling wallpaper sit open to the elements. Walking through Glenrio feels like stepping into a time capsule where the American road trip dream slowly rusted away. The town represents what happened to hundreds of Route 66 communities when the interstate highway system bypassed them. Business dried up overnight. People moved away. Buildings were abandoned. The neon signs that once beckoned travelers went dark and never lit up again. Today, Glenrio is one of the best preserved ghost towns along the Mother Road, attracting Route 66 enthusiasts, photographers, and history buffs documenting the decline of roadside America. The buildings are deteriorating, but enough remains to visualize what it looked like when the highway was king. It's a peculiar kind of ghost town. Unlike mining towns that died because the ore ran out, or farming towns that died because the water dried up, Glenrio died because progress took a different route. The town didn't fail. The world just moved on without it. Number 6. Lobo. Hidden in the Chihuahuan Desert in Culberson County between Van Horn and Valentine on US 90, Lobo's weathered buildings bake under the relentless West Texas sun. Water shortages and economic decline gradually emptied this tiny farming community until 1991, when the last residents packed up for good. Lobo's story is simple and tragic. The town depended on water from nearby springs for farming. As water sources dried up and farming became impossible, people moved away. There was no dramatic disaster, no sudden calamity, just a slow recognition that the land could no longer support them. The town briefly gained fame in the early 2000s when it was put up for sale for $100,000. A group of artists and history lovers have tried to bring life back to the town with occasional events and gatherings, but Lobo remains largely abandoned. Empty storefronts line the dusty street. A boarded-up motel stands silent. The desert is slowly reclaiming what humans briefly occupied. Number 5. Belle Plaine. In Callahan County, the limestone ruins of Belle Plaine rise from the mesquite like ancient monuments. During the 1870s, Belle Plaine was considered one of the most promising West Texas towns. We do not know of a more pleasant or beautiful place or one with brighter prospects for a prosperous future than Belle Plaine, wrote Captain George W. Baylor of the Texas Rangers in 1879. Belle Plaine College was the pride of the town, one of the first institutions of its kind in West Texas. In 1881, its first year, the college enrolled 22 students. By fall 1882, there were 85 students. The college taught classical courses like philosophy, history, astronomy, and physics, but its reputation relied on the music department. The school reportedly had a dozen grand pianos. The college closed after only 11 years due to financial hardships brought on by a drought from 1886 to 1887. But the town was already in trouble. The Texas and Pacific Railway had established a new town, Baird, only 6 miles north of Belle Plaine. Many residents and businesses moved to Baird, including the newspaper and jail. Baird won the county seat in 1883. By 1887, only 4 families remained in Belle Plaine. The skeletal courthouse, gutted by fire after Belle Plaine lost its county seat status, watches over a town that no longer exists. A pioneer cemetery holds generations of families who bet their futures on this location. Today, the courthouse ruins stand defiant against time and abandonment. Number 4, Sherwood. Way out in West Texas ranch country in Erie County sits Sherwood, a town that never quite made it big. Established in the early 1900s when the Kansas City, Mexico, and Orient Railway came through, folks had high hopes. The town featured a hotel, general store, and school, serving surrounding ranchers and their families. The sandstone walls of the former Kent County Jail stand defiant against time and abandonment. Sherwood's decline began when nearby Jayton stole the county seat in a hotly contested election that split the community. Without its governmental purpose, the town withered as ranching operations consolidated and families sought opportunities elsewhere. Not much remains. A few foundations, the jail ruins, empty prairie stretching in all directions. Number 3, Claremont. In Kent County, the sandstone walls of the former county jail stand among the ruins of Claremont. The town's decline began when nearby Jayton stole the county seat in a hotly contested election. Without its governmental purpose, Claremont withered as ranching operations consolidated and families sought opportunities elsewhere. Visiting these ruins on a quiet morning, you can almost hear the sounds of courthouse proceedings and jail cell doors that once echoed through this now silent place. Number 2, Indian Gap. The small abandoned town of Indian Gap sits about 2 hours south of Fort Worth, between Priddy and Pottsville in Hamilton County. A bustling town in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was eventually deserted, left to the mesquite and the wind. The town's name allegedly came from a gap in the hills where Native Americans once traveled through the area. During its heyday, Indian Gap served as a trading post and gathering place for scattered ranchers and farmers working the difficult hill country soil. Now all that remains are the columns of the schoolhouse, standing like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky, and a handful of weathered buildings slowly collapsing under their own weight. The school columns are the most photographed remnant, stark white limestone pillars that once supported a roof where children learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. If going to church in a ghost town interests you, the Indian Gap Baptist Church is still active with a small congregation that meets on Sundays and Wednesdays, keeping a tiny spark of life in an otherwise dead town. It's an odd sight, a functioning church surrounded by ruins, the only building in town with fresh paint and maintained grounds. The cemetery still receives occasional burials, mostly descendants of the original settlers who want to be buried with their ancestors. On quiet Sunday mornings, you can hear hymns drifting across the empty town site, a reminder that even in death, some communities refuse to completely let go. Number 1, Hagerman. Most ghost towns died slow deaths as residents gradually moved away. Hagerman drowned. In the early 1870s, farmers began colonizing an area 80 miles north of Dallas that would eventually become Hagerman. Originally named Steedman for Judge S.D. Steedman of Grayson County, the town was officially established and given a post office in 1880. The name changed to Hagerman in honor of railroad attorney James Hagerman in 1909 after the Missouri-Kansas and Texas Railroad reached the town. By 1910, Hagerman had roughly 250 residents and several businesses: a school, a church, a railroad depot, and a cotton gin. The town's prosperity was short-lived. The creation of Lake Texoma threatened to completely submerge the town. By 1940, the population had dropped to about 150 as people realized what was coming. Hagerman was flooded in 1943 with the completion of Denison Dam. In total, 83,000 acres of land were submerged by the lake, including most of Hagerman. While most of Hagerman is underwater, the church and cemetery remain above water level and are still visible. On clear days when the water is low, you can sometimes see the foundations of buildings beneath the surface. It's an eerie reminder that sometimes towns don't fade away. Sometimes they're deliberately drowned in the name of progress. Texas has over 511 documented ghost towns, more than any other state in America. They represent boom and bust cycles, natural disasters, economic shifts, and the brutal reality that not every town makes it. Some of these places are completely abandoned. Others, like Terlingua and Helena, cling to life with small populations that refuse to let history die. A few, like Indianola and Hagerman, exist only as markers and memories, literally washed away or drowned. These ghost towns aren't supposed to be part of Texas's brand. The state prefers to promote growth, prosperity, and success. But these failures tell a more complete story of what it took to settle this massive state and how quickly fortune can turn to dust. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden history. And if you've ever visited any of these ghost towns, drop a comment and tell us what you found. Some of these places are still out there, waiting to tell their stories to anyone willing to listen.